Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Berger, and I'm the coordinator for the Northwest Fire Science Consortium. For those of you not familiar with the consortium, we are one of 15 fire science exchange networks that are funded by the Joint Fire Science Program. Part of our mission is to disseminate regionally relevant information to our stakeholders in Oregon and Washington. So we try to accomplish this by offering a diversity of opportunities for people to participate in, and hosting webinars is just one way we accomplish that. To learn more about the consortium or to sign up for our monthly newsletter, visit our webpage at nwfirescience.org. So to avoid any noise interference, I have muted your audio, so if you have a question, please type that into the chat box. Also, I will be recording the webinar and will archive it on our website and YouTube channel. And so I went ahead and put those web addresses in the chat box as well. So I'd like to welcome this morning Josh Clark. Josh Clark is the meteorologist for the Washington DNR. He specializes in fire weather and applications of weather in forecasting fire danger, smoke impacts, and forest health. He manages Washington State's remote weather station network and is an IMET trainee and working on his FF1 task book. During his off time, he is pursuing an MS in fire ecology at Idaho. So super busy guy. So thank you so much, Josh, for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk with us today. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie, for having me in the Northwest Fire Science Consortium. DNR is happy to be a part of the consortium, and I look forward to the great things we're going to do for the next couple of years. This is just an outlook for the 2017 fire season in Washington and Oregon. And, you know, I kind of wrote the abstract for this. Maybe it was a little enticing, saying it's going to be kind of an unusual fire season, and I certainly believe it will be, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. So here's what we're going to go over, just kind of factors that we use to predict fire season, what a normal fire season looks like in the Pacific Northwest, some of our preseason conditions, so what's been happening over about the last 6 months, summer outlook, mostly from the Climate Prediction Center, and then a summary of what we can expect for the PNW. So this first line is just 6 external drivers of fire season activity, and activity is defined as fire occurrence and area burned. So these are kind of the 6 factors that I'm taking a look at, and my counterparts, John at NWCC and the Weather Service folks. We're looking at end-of-season fuels conditions, so what were our fuel moistures in our 1,000 hours and 10,000 hours towards the end of last season, October, November. Spring snowpack and subsequent snowmelt and runoff. We all know at this point we've had a considerable snowpack this year. Summer weather and fuels response. So this is just the overarching highs and lows that typically govern our weather patterns and how our fuels respond during those kind of annual lows in precip and highs in temperature. And then, of course, we wouldn't have a fire season without ignition triggers, human-caused, lightning-caused ignitions, human in Washington being 70% of the blame in any given year. And then on the back end of fire season, our season-ending events, fall and winter rainfall coinciding with lower temperatures. So what is a normal fire season for the Pacific Northwest? A season where weather, fire danger, number, and distribution of fires are about average. That should be kind of a given there. In the Pacific Northwest, this is typically June through October, and generally begins with lower elevation cured grasses and 100-hour fuels in the Columbia Basin, Central and Southeast Oregon in June. Early July, we get kind of your classic 4th of July human ignition situation, and then some early season lightning busts in receptive smaller fuels. This kind of dictates the tempo early on, June, July, as our heavier fuels are starting to dry out. Peak fire season is generally in August. I think the GAC says about 6 large fires across the Northwest can be expected around this time. And extreme weather events, thermal troughs, I guess you would say the easterly wind events on the west side of the Cascades, subsequent thermal trough passage on the east side of the Cascades, the breakdown of the upper level ridge out in the basin and eastern Oregon, and dry cold fronts all heavily influence our fire season severity. This was a graphic, and it's funny, we just had it working like a couple minutes ago, but for some reason it's not now, but it stepped through time about a week intervals, and shows the probability of a large fire, over 100 acres in any given week throughout the season. And that really starts to increase in late May, early June in the Columbia Basin, and then spreads to much of the east slopes for both states, getting into late June, early July, before really the entirety of the Pacific Northwest enters its fire season in mid to late July. So in terms of reported fires and acres burned, a normal fire season for us in Oregon is about 475,000 acres, and fire occurrence being around 1,900 fires. And you can see over the last 10 years, that's been heavily fluctuates, but in 2016, Oregon was remarkably below that 10-year running average in terms of area burned and fire occurrence. And then in Washington, there's about an average fire season. This is area burned right here on the left. 275,000 acres is pretty typical for us, and about 1,400 fires in any given year for the last 10 years. So jumping into our preseason conditions, these are our end-of-season fuels. On the left, we have late October 2016 and late October 2015, and you can see a remarkable difference coming off the back end of the most catastrophic fire season we have on record in the Pacific Northwest. Things were looking especially grim through last winter and then into 2016. Luckily, ample spring rainfall brought us back up, and we ended up with an average to below average fire season last year. This year, we went into the end of fire season with really no major concerns in Washington and only abnormal to moderate drought severity present in the eastern two-thirds of Oregon. So faring a lot better as we came into winter. These are our temperatures over the last 6 months, mostly cooler than normal over the last 6 months in Washington. We've had some areas that have been 13 degrees below normal. It's just truly remarkable how this is, and I should say this is my first winter in the Pacific Northwest, so just not a good show. Cool and rainy, yeah, this has been truly a remarkable year, but for the most part, areas have seen 5 to 13 degrees below normal, with some exceptions being down in Oregon. High pressure conditions in late May brought the monthly average for May above normal. We've seen a return to cooler, moist conditions for most of the region, so and expect that to continue for the next week or so. Snowpack and stream flow. This was snowpack on May 15th on the left, and snowpack June 2nd on the right. And then here is stream flow out of all of our major rivers. And you can see we've actually increased in snowpack over the last 15 days. We keep saying, we're kind of experiencing these pulses of snowmelt. Rivers are, I keep watching the Weather Service issue river flood warnings and then cancel them, or river flood warning and cancel them because we're going into these kind of cyclic warm, cool, and snowpack's not coming off as fast as one, I guess, would hope. So stream flows have been average to above average for almost every location in the PNW, and of note, this is the highest snowpack we've had since 2011, and in 2011 we burned about 17,000 acres in Washington. So really, not a good sign for a dramatic fire season. In the last 180 days, precip has been well above normal, 110 to 150% of normal. This is the second wettest period since February on record. The record holder is 1904. So since 1904, there's never been a wetter period in the Northwest. It's just, yeah, absolutely unreal to me. Water year records were broken for many locations in western Washington in March. That was experienced in Seattle, Olympia, and much of the Puget Sound. And soil moistures have been consistently above the 95th percentile, and they really haven't changed in the last 2 months. Between March and April they didn't change, and now with the warmer temperatures in May, they've gone down. So this is, again, the entire water year. So this is October 1st through present. Precipitation of normal, percent of normal. This is the kind of deviation from the climatology. And you can see that for the most part, the entire Northwest has been 110 to 150% of normal for precip. And all of these factors combining, cooler temperatures, higher snowpack, and significantly above average precip, have yielded no drought concerns for the Northwest. And that is pretty incredible considering last year around this time we did have some drought concerns. Fuels, we sat in on a fuels call with the Pacific Northwest with the GAC yesterday, and we're able to discern that most areas in the Pacific Northwest are about 2 to 3 weeks behind the schedule, and that grasses are about 50 to 80% cured out. On recent prescribed fires, there's been poor consumption of any fuels above 100 hours, and most 1,000-hour plus fuels are trending 15 to 20% above average. And this is just a relative greenness map showing kind of that curing out of those basin-type fuels. Their greenness is kind of, more depleted than you would see, say, over on the west side. So no concerns for heavier fuels, but there is abundant grass-type fuels present in the basin and southeast Oregon this year. I picked this quote from the Yakima Herald. I was quoted in here, and they put this grassoline term in between my quotes, and it kind of makes it sound like I said that, and I've never heard grassoline in my life, but I thought it was kind of a catchy title nonetheless. But these are some quotes here from the Pacific Northwest Fuels Call. Grasses are taller, more abundant than I've ever seen. Densest and tallest cheatgrass in the Columbia Basin. Heavy fine fuels, best grass crop in 4 to 5 years. So already we're tuning our eyes to the Columbia Basin being kind of a catalyst for an above-average fire season there. And I wanted to show that fuels are already starting to reflect the curing out of grasses in anything below 100 hours. These are ERC percentiles for today. You can see they're ticked up here in most of the Columbia Basin in central Oregon, and then burning index over in the eastern Columbia Basin is pretty high as well today. So they're already starting to reflect kind of higher fire season values there. So here is a outlook for summer, and this is El Nino, La Nina, trying to discern which one of these might govern our overall weather pattern into the summer. So on the left here is sea surface temperature anomalies. This is the equator, and usually around here for the kind of northwest, we're expecting to see above 0.5 degrees Celsius anomalies for El Nino and below 0.5 degrees Celsius for La Nina. And you can see in the last month or so, we've been hovering in that kind of 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius positive anomaly, which would kind of suggest that we're going into El Nino just from kind of a rough look here. However, the average for this sector is about 0.6, so it's still too early to tell that we're going into this El Nino type conditions. The Climate Prediction Center suggests that we're actually still in these INSO neutral conditions. This is always a complicated graphic to explain, but very valuable. This is all of the different models that kind of dictate when it's going to be El Nino, La Nina, and when these models start ticking above 0.5, that's El Nino, and when they're below negative 0.5, that's kind of La Nina. And here is our time by season down here on this x-axis. And you can see the average for the models is suggesting anywhere between 0.5 and 1 degree Celsius above normal. And that kind of equates to INSO neutral conditions persisting, or weak El Nino conditions setting up for late summer and fall. And here are the impacts that La Nina and El Nino typically have on the Pacific Northwest. I see during a La Nina type winter, we get the Pacific jet stream is aimed right at the Northwest, and we get cool, moist conditions present throughout the winter. Pretty much what we saw this last winter was a good La Nina type episode. With El Nino, we get warmer, drier conditions in the winter. Think of 2014 to 15. That was much more pronounced than this one will possibly be, but warmer and drier, and that typically leads to drought-type conditions setting up for fire season. In the case of its effects on this fire season, if that El Nino type event does set up earlier, as suggested right now, September, October, this could delay our typical season-ending events, push us into kind of some end-of-season warmer and drier conditions. And here is the temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center for 1 and 3 months out. The 1 month reflects about a 30 to 50% certainty and above average temperatures for most of the West Coast. The 3 month basically has about the same chances, and to note, this is more of a reflection of kind of dipping towards slight El Nino type conditions, and the climate forecast system's response to that. And precipitation over the next month is expected to be below average for the Pacific Northwest with equal confidence. So climatology basically prevails in the 3 month outlook, and we know that climatology for us in June, July, August is a kind of a low or an annual low in precipitation. So one thing I wanted to note, and our operations chief briefed me on yesterday, was this potential for the total solar eclipse, and potential for this to be a high ignition trigger type event. This is, I guess, a once-in-a-lifetime thing that makes this fire season pretty unusual. Just reading through some of the articles, Oregon State Parks reporting that all of its campsites were booked in April, and people are paying thousands of dollars to book Airbnbs or hotels that are in the vicinity of this solar eclipse's path. There's been estimates of 500,000 to 1.5 million people expected in Central Oregon around August 21st. And this coincides with our peak fire season, which is especially alarming. So I know there has been talk of setting up incident management teams in the Northwest specifically to kind of counteract and hopefully mitigate some of the ignitions that would be present with this influx of people. So in summary here, these major complicating factors, the above average grass crop in the Columbia Basin and Southeast Oregon is really probably going to translate to an above average fire season for them. Elsewhere, below average, especially on the west side, The the Okanagan, northeast counties of Washington, the east slopes of Oregon could be about average. El Nino conditions likely to set up during late fire season, and the total solar eclipse coinciding with peak fire season. So all of these factors really make for an extremely unusual fire season, especially in recent memory. Things have kind of been straightforward. 2011 significantly below average. That one was, fairly obvious with snowpack and then 200% and temperatures and precip being the way they were. 2015, the drought really was a huge indicator that 2015 would be so severe. And this year, all the meteorological conditions suggest basically below normal to average. But when you take into account El Nino conditions setting up on the back end of this fire season and the solar eclipse being just an absolutely outstanding ignition trigger event, this could be a very unique fire season. So here's the summary. Above average rainfall, snowpack. Snowpack was, I think, 139% as of 2 weeks ago. Cool temperatures, below average to average fire season for the Northwest, with the exception of the Columbia Basin, the East Slopes, and Southeast Oregon. This is due to ample grasses, record fine fuel loadings. The total eclipse event complicates the operations tempo during peak fire season, and the weak El Nino on the back end of fire season could delay the normal fire season end. And this may strain agencies in terms of budget and resources. So, we're going to be actively monitoring what the conditions are going to be in October and early November, because we're going to start releasing assets. Our seasonals are going to go back to school, and things are going to be drawing down. And if this El Nino sets up, we could see kind of a delay in the fire season ending, and then end up in a situation where we may not have sufficient resources, or we keep on assets that may pan out to not be needed. And ultimately, you take every bit of this with a grain of salt and realize that ignition triggers and extreme weather events will dictate fire season activity. The majority of our ignitions are from humans, especially here in Washington. So it's important that we have proactive, timely burn bans. We're out there educating folks, and we're enforcing burn bans to help control these new ignitions. So that's really all I have. Usually these outlets go pretty quick, and then we can open it up for questions and just talk about the weather.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. That was really interesting, and I've wondered about that too, the solar eclipse and the effect it will have, in the area and the ignitions. And I wonder, you might, I'm not sure you know this answer, but maybe somebody could type something into the chat box, but are we working on outreach? Because these people, I bet we'll get a lot of folks from out of town, and perhaps, and even internationally, perhaps they're not aware of, conditions and fire season and things like that. And are you aware of any active outreach that's being planned for that time, or how we're going to go about that?
Well,
have you heard anything?
Carrie, I'm not aware, but our ops chief here for the DNR is sitting right next to me, and he'd be happy to answer that.
Perfect. Yeah. Great.
Aaron Schmidt, and as Josh alluded, I'm not the operations chief for the state for the DNR. Yeah, so we've been in constant communication with Oregon Department of Forestry and our federal partners down there. There's been a pretty significant outreach by many of the chambers of commerce and kind of a consolidated message from Oregon Emergency Management out there. The gross amount of people isn't necessarily the issue so much as infrastructure, and we talked about the carrying capacity of major thoroughfares like Interstate 5, US 101, US 97, and likely there will be no ingress or egress out of the state for up to 7 days, just because of the load on that.
Wow.
The difficulties span further than that as far as the airports. A lot of the small municipal airports are concerned about availability of space and how that affects us as far as is refueling helicopters, refueling air tankers, those types of things. Don't quote me, but it was mentioned at one point that the Redmond Airport in Redmond, Oregon was looking at having approximately 50,000 airplanes there during that time. And if you've ever been out to that airport, you'll know that's probably not a great idea. So right now, it's one of those things where everything is projected numbers. The historic projections on these types of events are usually always fall short. So I guess, which is to say, it's probably not going to be less. It'll probably be
right.
And again, Josh alluded to, its peak fire season. A historical average is between Oregon and Washington is on August 21st, 22nd. We have approximately 6 large fires going between the two states. So we're kind of scratching our heads a little bit. If we insert assets into Oregon and pre-position them, and something happens, that's a good stroke of business. The unfortunate part is if nothing does happen and we need those assets to go somewhere else, they're likely not going to be able to leave anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some messaging to answer your original question going out. One of the things we wanted to talk about, we continue to see this as recently as a month ago, is many of the large sporting good retailers have camping guides, camping books, and in reference to disposing of human waste and toilet paper, one of the preferred methods is burning it, and we continue to get fires started from burning toilet paper when folks are following recreational guides. And so if you look at, again, carrying capacity in that portion of Central Oregon, you're going to have a lot of dispersed camping in non-traditional camping areas. And again, at the peak of fire season, it's something that's concerning to us. But again, all of the fire management organizations, Oregon, Washington, and our federal partners, we're talking frequently about this and working with emergency management folks and kind of putting together as best of a plan. It's difficult to plan for something that you don't know exactly how it's gonna pan out. So trying to right-size the approach is really critical.
Right. Well, thanks for that. Wow. I was just at a conference in Nevada, and they do a lot of messaging in their airport for fire, which I thought was pretty clever, just get people coming, just thinking of different ways to reach out to people, whether it's, through their campgrounds or sporting goods stores or even the airport or billboards along the highway. I think we need to think outside the box and just try to, target as many people as possible in different ways. Thanks for that update.
Yeah.
Does anybody go ahead?
You said non-traditional. I was at a conference up in the Yukon last month, and they have started putting fire prevention messages on fishing lures that they sell.
That's awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Josh or anything that was unclear or that you want to, ask about? Now would be a great time. I don't see anybody typing anything yet, but we'll give it a minute or two. And while we're waiting, I guess I want to thank you, Josh. I know you're so busy. Thank you for giving this webinar today to us. I really appreciate that. And I also want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy schedules to listen in today. And of course, we're always open for suggestions for webinars. So if you have any ideas of things you want to listen to and find out more about, don't hesitate to contact us. I think our website address is still available, but let me see if I can just send that off again. There we go. Well, I don't see any questions coming in, so
Great.
I guess thanks again, everybody, and thank you again, Josh, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.